order at 5:32. Sue, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Canfield.
Here.
Councilmember Chambers.
Here.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Here.
Councilmember Yankovic is absent, and Mayor DeVore.
I'm here. Motion to approve Cliff's absence for his vacation.
I'll make that motion.
Support. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? He's excused. Motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
I'll make that motion to approve the agenda.
I'll support.
Discussion or changes? Sue?
Councilmember Canfield.
Yes.
Councilmember Chambers.
Yes.
Councilmember Salzweedl.
Yes.
Councilmember Yankovic is absent, and Mayor DeVore.
Yes. Citizen comment for items not on the committee agenda. All right. Number 4, rate study, Michael.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and City Council. In front of you tonight, we're going to be discussing the SAW grant project. One of the components of the SAW grant project was that we would have a rate study done on our water and sewer rates to determine how to fund all, based on the recommendations of the improvements through the SAW grant. One of the most important parts is the financial component of how you're going to pay for all of these improvements, and being that these are utilities, they would be coming out of your water and sewer rates. So I've been working with Baker Tilly, actually for over the last year on this rate study, and now that we're submitting everything to the state, we have a good plan in place as to the projects that we will be looking at over the next 10 years. We also have an evaluation of your water and sewer rates going forward, which surprisingly is not as bad as I thought it would be. And we're going to be going over those with you, and just getting your feedback on these things as we go forward. So I'm going to turn this over to Andy Campbell from Baker Tilly, and I guess I'll have him start the discussion.
How's everyone doing? I could. There's one pad. If you take one and pass it down, it's about 7 pages. I think it's going to be the same one that's in your packet, but just in case you want to take a copy. So again, my name is Andy Campbell with Baker Tilly. We are financial advisors that work across the state in the areas of bond issuance and water and sewer rate studies. We work with approximately 400 communities now in the state, and we're on about 130 SAW grants. So we've seen it all in terms of communities that are in really good shape, communities that are got some decisions to make. The overall is that this is one of the easier discussions for us, to be perfectly honest. You guys are all in good shape. A lot of this comes down to decisions made in the past with rates, which have been good, and then a big plus since our recent discussion, when we first came in about a year ago, one of the big discussion points was Lighthouse, and where that's going to go in terms of the revenues in the future. That has helped tremendously now that they're back online. So that has made the discussion a lot easier in terms of the rates for tonight. A lot of the assumptions that we were looking at when we first started this and doing the preliminary analysis, again, like a year ago now, was a lot different conclusion without Lighthouse. So just know that going forward, this is assuming, obviously we've talked with the crew in terms of what to assume for Lighthouse, but that is one of the big variables that the community has, is that they have a large user on the system. We deal with a lot of those communities. Big dairies, obviously in Michigan, there are a lot of communities that have big dairy systems. There's big water users for fruit processors up in the Northwest. So we see it a lot, but that is something to keep in mind when we're looking at this analysis. There are a lot of assumptions, but the overall is that when we look at this compared to a lot of communities in the state, you guys are in a really good position. There are a lot of communities that this SAW grant, why it came into place, was that the state was frankly kind of tired of communities doing knee-jerk reactions, emergency fixes. What their push is, both federally and state, is to have communities have a plan in place to address these systems because they are expensive. It's expensive to maintain water and sewer. The reality is that they're underground, so you don't think about them until something bad happens most of the time. But you've got people that on the ground that are helping you take care of this stuff with the engineers and DPW, but a lot of this comes down to hopefully good planning in the future to make this as painless as possible on the rate side. In terms of the analysis, we're actually going to go through both water and sewer. So this is the sewer side for the first part of the analysis because we did do a water portion as well. We're going to go through and just highlight some main numbers that we look at when we look at these analyses, and then get to the conclusion here pretty soon so we can talk about what the analysis is showing. On page 1, you'll see this is a compilation of your audits. The main number that we look at on this page is actually the top number, the cash and pooled investments. One of the things that you'll notice is that it has gone down recently. That is due to capital improvements and the lighthouse situation. So not too much to read into actually on this page. Normally, if everything was status quo for the last 4 years and we saw this trend in cash, there would be major questions about what was happening on the system of why the cash was going down so much. But that was due to the decrease in revenues from the lighthouse. Now that lighthouse is back in the line and they're hopefully going to continue sending more and more, then we should be in a good situation revenue-wise, thus the cash should be all right. Page 2, this is again from your audits, so 16 through 19 audits. Again, the top line is the number that we generally look at, and again, not too much to read into here because of lighthouse. We'll talk about more of this stuff in the actual analysis of what the numbers we can look at in the future here, because a lot of the past history has been skewed by the last couple of years. Page 3, and actually goes on to page 4, is the compilation of your budgets. So this is actually going into budget history for 16 through 20. And if we can jump to page 4, the middle column that says test year, at the very bottom, you'll see a number that says 922,966. Ignoring debt for now, we'll talk about that in a second. Capital improvements we'll talk about in a second. This analysis is done on the cash basis, so we do not include depreciation. This is what we need to bring in revenue-wise for cash, what we're expending in cash every year. We need to bring in a little over $900,000 a year to cover the operations of the sewer fund. So $922,000 is the absolute minimum that we need to bring in just to cover the operations on the system. Then obviously we have other commitments as well with the debt and capital improvements we'll talk about, but that is a key number when you look towards the future of where the system is going operationally. You can see in the next column over, we have multipliers on each of those line items. This is a 20-year analysis. So when you're looking at this, actually you guys did 10 years, 10-year analysis. So when you look at this over 10 years, obviously that number will not be the same in 10 years. Those costs generally rise over 10 years, so we take that into account in this analysis. That in commonly termed inflation, those numbers are included so that you can be sure that with the rise in rates, there's an assumption that the operations will rise as well, and that's included in the analysis. But 922 is the baseline right now. The reason why it's different from if you go left to the 16 through 20 budgets is primarily due to SAW. So there are SAW expenses built into your previous budgets, along with other capital improvements. That 922 is just your baseline operations, period. SAW grant's done here now, actually. It was done at the end of the last year. So we're moving on with just the baseline system from now moving forward, what we need to cover in the future for operations. Page 5 is the current debt issue on the sewer side. Pretty much, I mean, there's nothing really spectacular. I mean, when you're looking at this, this is going to be it for the foreseeable future. That was issued in 2016, so most likely you can't do anything either like paying it down early or refunding or refinancing, as it's commonly known, in the next 7 or so years. That usually has a 10-year call protection on it. So really, for the next 7 to 10 years, that is what it is. You're going to be paying about $150,000, give or take, on the debt side for the sewer fund. And that's obviously built into the analysis on the next page, on page 6. So, page 6 is the analysis on the sewer side. This is just the sewer portion right now. We'll talk about water in a second. One of the things that, again, just to harp on it a little bit more, when we first came in, and we were talking with Mike and Sue earlier in 2019, one of the things that was a question at that time was what happens to the rates because Lighthouse wasn't sending us sewer. So with the assumption that Lighthouse is now on the line and they're sending us a certain amount of gallons per day, and the assumption going forward is that they're going to be increasing that to an extent, you can see that you guys are in pretty good shape on the sewer side. One of the things that you'll see across the state, this is in a lot of these, was obviously we're on these, is that communities are finding out that through the SAW grant that rate increases are necessary. The days of communities getting by without rate increases for 10 or 20 years is over. So what we have talked about with Mike and Sue and the crew is that inflationary increases is the way to go. When you do inflationary increases, you're not only covering expected increases in your operations budget, but it also is helping with your capital improvement budget as well. So Brian Newhoff had talked to you about the capital improvement side, and the reality is that on the sewer fund system, it's really not that much from what we typically see. You guys are in good shape operationally, you're in good shape, it looks like, on the capital side. This analysis is pretty much showing that if you can keep up with inflationary increases and that the council is willing to do that every year, just a small increase to the sewer rates, then you can tackle this plan that's been laid out before you. So we'll go through what the different numbers are and then just give you some baseline thoughts, and then we'll move on to water here. But let's go through the 2019-20 column and
On page 6.
on page 6, yep. I apologize, we usually have this all color-coded and a lot easier to read, but our printer jammed this morning, unfortunately, back from vacation and everything. So going down the 2019-20 column, you'll see the second number from the top, ready to serve charge per month. Again, this is only the sewer side, $24.44 per month. So your smallest meter is charged $24.44. If you go down, you'll see down about 6 numbers or so, there's a $4.04 charge. Your typical customer, if they're a city customer, they pay $24.44 per month just to have service in the sewer side, and then $4.04 per 1,000 gallons. There's an italicized line, a couple lines down, that's the typical homeowner's bill. When we use metrics across the state for what a typical homeowner uses, and you gotta be careful because I'm sure everyone in this room is gonna have different water usage, but the typical usage that we see used by USDA and others is 4,500 gallons per month. So that charge for the city homeowner is $42.64, you can see in the 2019-20 column. So right now, your typical homeowner on the sewer side of the bill is paying $42.64. What does that mean? When you look across the state, this is just from doing hundreds of analyses, our medium range is $35 to $55 per month. So you are almost right in the middle of the middle range. right now comparatively to other communities. You have to be careful, and we are always careful about qualifying that greatly, because there are certain segments of Michigan that are cheaper than others and more expensive than others. For example, we have communities that are up by Traverse City in the Leelanau Peninsula. It is very expensive to have sewer systems up there because of the cold. They're not heavily populated systems that are very spread out. So you get little pockets that are different, but on the whole, you guys are right in the middle of where we see rates on the sewer side, which is good. It's good that you guys have been able to keep rates relatively low, and you're doing the right things in terms of capital and funding the system well. One of the things you have to be careful about too, just on a little side tangent here, is that when you compare yourself to other communities, even next door, let's say, you have to be careful about how well they're doing. Because if you're keeping up on your system, both capital improvement wise, operationally, they may be charging $5 less per month, but their system may be a train wreck that needs emergency repairs next year that they're planning for. So you can't always compare, but we do want to give that baseline comparison to say that you're in the middle range. You've done well in terms of funding everything capital improvement wise and operationally by being in the middle range. Yep.
So this charge is for only water we are being assessed at our meter?
Correct. So yeah, this is the sewer side of the bill,
Anything else
but
that overflows, we're not being charged for that? Because let's just say, I hear that we're processing twice as much water because of leakage.
correct.
None of us ratepayers are seeing none of that?
Not
That's what I
directly.
figured, yeah.
Yep. So what happens is that you, as a ratepayer, you get charged X amount that goes, well, in the case of sewer, you get charged $4.04 per 1,000 gallons that goes through your water meter. Directly speaking, you're not getting charged for the excess of, it's called I&I, so inflow and infiltration that goes to be treated. Indirectly, you are getting charged for that because the plant is having to expend costs to treat that, and thus it's in your operational budget, which is built into your rates. So directly speaking, no, you don't get a direct charge saying that I use 5,000 gallons, but I'm getting charged for 10,000 because there's I&I in the system. No, but it's that $4.04. Let's say you didn't have I&I, inflow and infiltration problems, maybe you'd only need to charge $3.80 per 1,000 gallons. So indirectly, yes, directly, no. Yep.
I didn't know what that percentage was towards the sewer fund. It's a lot, or?
Do you remember what their I&I?
Yeah, it's a high
High.
I-9.
25%.
So the more we reduce I-9, the lower
Yes.
the O&M cost will be at the
Okay.
plant.
Yeah.
So technically, if we fix some of our issues, we may not necessarily have to increase it as much as we may think we need to do, because we're no longer now paying that constant.
Well, you won't notice the
Correct.
inflationary cost increase because
Right.
you'll lose that other cost.
Right.
Right,
Balance it out a little bit.
Right.
It'll still be there, and you're still gonna pay.
But your maintenance cost going forward won't be as high. And then the other thing too is it's a capital expense where, because of, once we do correct those issues, you won't have to do a plant expansion.
Right.
On our end, at least.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue that Brian mentioned before the meeting here, is that this does not include a plant expansion. Correct, at all. So that is one big assumption in this analysis right now that we're talking about, is that if something happens to the flows of the system, whether it's customer driven, for instance, if the city decides to expand the system out, or this decides to allow Lighthouse to increase their flows by 200%, then that could drive a plant expansion, which could thus, you basically, at that point, if you were to do a plant expansion, you're in the process of thinking about it, you gotta get someone to update this, either us, internally, someone else. You gotta make sure that that's getting done, because this just assumes status quo system based on the current assumptions right now, so.
But with everything that's going on in the community, we really are looking at an expansion.
Without the infiltration solution.
On our end, we won't need to, unless Lighthouse needs to, or you decide you want to expand a service outside the district, then
Right,
yes.
we
that would
talked
be-
about doing, I
Correct.
mean, it's likely that it's coming.
It could be, yes.
So are we taking the right steps now? Should we be looking at this a little differently at this point?
Well, I think what you can argue is that those costs are not your costs. They should be passed on directly to the township and the
outside.
and the outside. Say, for example, if Lighthouse needed to double their, that cost really should be paid by them. It shouldn't be paid by the other ratepayers.
That is exactly what I was gonna say. Is that if somebody causes you to do a planned expansion, not of your own doing, so it's not through I&I problems. If Lighthouse comes and says that we want to double our flow and that's gonna cost, I don't know the numbers, but let's say it's $10 million, then that should be in a negotiation with Lighthouse to pay $10 million. If the township comes on and says we want X amount of flow and it's gonna cost the city $7 million to get them that flow, then the township should be coming to the table with $7 million. So planned expansions, generally speaking, if they're not forced by the current customers, should be billed back in special assessments or connection fees to those customers that are necessitating that expansion.
So if we stay where we're at right now and we fix those three major I&I problems, we don't need to expand for a long time, right? On our end at least?
Probably never on the city.
But 2 or 3 months ago, we had a committee of the whole meeting about a developer that, was looking at, hey, it's coming. I'm questioning, are we taking the right path? And going, nope, we're never going to expand and have a
But
blind
it-
eye to it.
But if they want it out there, they're the ones that have to
Right.
take the
Sure,
expansion.
but we should also plan for it because it is
I
coming.
understand that, but that's a if.
Yeah.
I think we're planning for the expansion, we're just not planning to pay for the.
Right.
Well, but
Right.
there's
Totally.
option cost and things like that, that we'll probably have to cover that.
Does that change what you're doing at all, or our approach? Just who's paying for it is the.
Right, as long as, if the plan expansion goes through, it does not matter for this analysis as long as you're getting reimbursed for that. If you guys say we're gonna cover 50% and the developer or company or whoever, township, whoever it is gonna cover 50, then yeah, it changes it. But if it's a 1-for-1, they're causing it, they're paying for it, it's the same thing, so, yeah.
So the only way these numbers really jump is if somebody annexed 300 acres to the city and we go out and develop that. Now we need to change rates and relook because we're going to be expanding the whole system and doing all that. So that's how that plays in.
Right, if you decide as a city to expand the system at your own cost,
Right.
that's when this changes, yep. So,
Because your 2%, I mean, that's 85 cents per,
for the typical homeowner,
Yeah.
yes, yep.
Over a 10-year period, you're looking at in that 10-year period, you're looking at almost a $6 increase on the ready to serve and a $1 on the commodity. That's 10 years from now.
Mhm. Yeah, the reality is, I mean, and I don't live here, so I don't pretend to know everyone's situation in the city, but when you're looking at an analysis that shows less than $1 per month increase, and again, this is only on sewer, we gotta talk about water, but less than $1 per month increase per year, most people, in my opinion, are not gonna see that as egregious. That's typical for bills to go up slightly as time goes on. So to me, when you're looking at the analysis that you just had a huge grant project, that you got a bunch of free money to look at your system, figure out the capital improvements, and to have the subsequent result from that be something saying, keep doing what we're doing and fund the capital improvements that the engineer has talked about inside of that current plan, that's a huge win in my eyes. So, I mean, you can look at it, there is one big caveat to this, and we talked about this at the meeting. If you look down at the bottom, we'll jump to, it's near the very bottom, it says right above the net cash flow, estimated debt service number 1, 24-25 bonds. There is one bond issue in this. So it is assuming that we're going to do one bond issue throughout the next 10 years, and that is $7 million. That is obviously something that would need to be addressed over the next few years to see if that is going to go, if that's the right amount, if those are the right projects we want to do and all that stuff. But the reality is that when you look at that cost being included in an inflationary increase plan, it's not a discussion for today, I don't think. I think it's, you can move forward with the inflationary increase plan and knowing that as time goes on, we'll look into those projects, see what we need to do to get those done as cost effective as possible. But that is one big caveat, is that we do have to possibly issue one large bond issue to get this done under inflationary plans. You can't do this under a cash funded scenario unless you really want to take rates way up. So, I mean, you can think about the fact that even if you spread over, if you're able to spread out that $7 million over, let's say, a 5-year period, you're still going to have to come up with, what's that, $1.3 million a year, and your cash flow is not going to support that unless you take rates way up. So I think the reality is that we try to stay away as much as possible from debt. Our personal bias, even though we help people issue debt across the state, is that we would prefer that systems are cash funded, but there comes a point in time, every system hits it, whether it's every 5 years, every 3 years, every 20 years, where debt is needed because it's the opposite is high rate increases, and it's usually not palatable. So trying to keep rate increases down, keep rates down in general, is much more palatable from our discussions with the working group than just trying to arbitrarily avoid debt. So.
Mike, you know when the last time we did a bond on sewer?
2016 when we did Broadway.
Okay.
That was we split that between the water and sewer funds, and it was a general obligation bond. So that goes back to my next question, Andy, is are we proposing these as general obligation bonds, or are we proposing these as revenue bonds? Because I just want to make sure we're not getting ourselves to a situation where we have debt coverage issues, where we have to have a debt ratio coverage for that.
So this, if you look at the very, very bottom there, it says note 2, and it says it assumes a 40-year USDA bond. When you're doing USDA, it is highly unlikely that you would do anything other than a revenue bond. USDA, we would assume for this scenario, you would do USDA revenue bonds, your coverage is 100%. So whatever you bring in revenue-wise has to pay the debt service. If you do open market revenue bonds, it's a long story, but basically you have to bring in, let's say, $101.30 for every dollar of debt you have, because a bank or someone who buys your bonds is concerned that, what happens if Lighthouse revenues go down? Are you going to have enough money to pay me? USDA is a government agency. They just make sure that you have enough money to pay based on the analysis. So a financial advisor would show them this cash flow saying, yep, we're bringing enough money to pay the debt, no worries, and they're signed off on it. So.
And I know, Brian, you probably can answer this. The CIP projects we're talking about for the $7 million, obviously the $3.5 million for Monroe and Washington to do everything, including the street, the water, and the sewer.
Right.
And then it looks like it's a lot more, but we have we do have some headworks works that we have to do at the wastewater plant. Is that what we're accounting for?
Yep, and I think Andy mentioned that, as each year we want to look at the CIP to evaluate those again and just see what's the current condition and make sure that's the year we want them in.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we want them there because we don't want to get blindsided by potential costs, but the truth is we're going to evaluate each year in the CIP process to make sure that those are the costs we need to and those are the projects we need in each of those years. So they could float out a little further as well.
And I guess my question is if we're gonna be moving forward on Washington Monroe here, 2021, 2022. Some of these are 6-7 years out. Do we really want to bond all $7 million at once? I mean, that's
Right.
And that's part of the thing is I mean, I know we're gonna have to, I know we're gonna have to bond $3.5 million right away. And we're gonna have to bond that to take care of all the issues on Monroe and Washington.
Right.
But the remaining parts of this, if it's something that, I mean, I'd rather not take that out where, and have it sit for 5 years where
Right.
we're not doing anything. I don't think the bond, would, like Standard & Poor's would even allow you to do that.
I mean, I think that's a very good point, Mike, that the idea is that before we really decide we're going to bond, then we reevaluate those projects, make sure they're what we want them to be, make sure the costs are right, make sure they're necessary, not necessary. So tonight, looking at this, you're not committing to doing any bonding, you're just saying, look, it's a potential, we've got a good heads up, as we get closer to it, we're gonna reevaluate and make sure it's the right move. Correct. And I guess one other point to note is, Andy mentioned that we've got, we're assuming a USDA, that bond, and it's set at a 40-year term. However, that is a maximum term, so there's no penalty for prepayment of that. So the idea is if for some reason, let's say you do that bond and you get a 40-year term on it, and you decide, you know what, we want to pay that off a little bit sooner, so we're gonna, instead of having a 2% sewer rate increase, maybe we'll go to 3% and apply that towards that bond to pay it off a little quicker. You can do that, that's an option you have. It's kind of the idea, kind of the analogy is, whether you have a 30-year mortgage or a 15-year mortgage, sometimes it's nicer to take out the 30-year, and then during the year, you can always make extra principal payments if you want and shorten the term of the loan, but you don't have to. So that's where that USDA loan gives you some nice flexibility when it comes to.
Like you mentioned, 20, 21, 22 possibly for the streets. When do we need to start applying for that bond and have it ready to go and your quotes in so that when the excavators show up, we're ready to rock and roll?
We're gonna be working on that this summer, because what we plan on budgeting for in the upcoming fiscal year is all the engineering costs for both Monroe and Washington. So once we start that, once we get that information, then we can start that process that we need to with USDA and all that.
The USDA is fairly quick. It's not the same as you may have heard the SRF or the DWF projects that go through EVO. Those are incredibly onerous and take a long time. The USDA is much more efficient.
Just to clarify, so we needed $10 to $15 million to do our roads. And we had money in the sewer and water funds, but all of a sudden now we're gonna add $7 million in debt that we're borrowing for this bond that we're gonna do to do Washington Street and Monroe.
Well, they're separate things, because you're talking utilities now. So we have, I mean, those are separate than the roads.
Right.
But the caveat you have in this instance is, because these are utility projects, you can put water and sewer funds to pay for those streets, which there's only a few streets in our network that really we can do that for.
So $1 million of it is street improvements, and that's less $1 million we have to go try to find later.
Correct.
Okay.
But we still need 10 to 15 for the roads plus. So we really are, I thought our funds were in better shape where we had money to cover, but not without borrowing money.
No, you're not going to do the underground utility work that you need to do. You're going to have to seek that to do all the utilities on those two streets. I mean, you're just without even addressing the road situation, you're looking at probably $2 million. The remaining is about $1.5 million roughly.
I mean, theoretically, I think Andy mentioned you can change rates and collect cash until a point where you could afford to pay for those projects for cash. But those create very large fund balances. That gets to be kind of unpalatable on the public side.
If you were going to do this on a cash end, you're looking at 15 to 20% rates next year, and then probably intermittent inflationary increases at that. I don't think that's where you really want to go. But you could. There are some communities that's how they would address it. They would just go seek the 20%, and then right away get the cash and pay cash on it. You have that option, but I don't know how your ratepayers are going to see that.
Yeah, just to tie up a couple of those things here. So right now, you've got, let's say, $1.7 million in the sewer fund. You've got a positive cash flow of a little bit less than $100,000. So if we were talking about capital improvements in the next 10 years of less than $100,000 a year, no debt. But 7 million for that project, you got another, actually, if you look out in the last year, it's a little less than 2 million in the last year. Obviously, that one's a definite, we gotta figure out if that's gonna hit in the next 10, 15 years or whatever, but there's no way. Without debt, this is not gonna happen. So we gotta either decide on issuing debt, higher rates, or lessening the projects. That's the real options, or a mixture, obviously, of 2 or 3 of those. So to tie up the USDA discussion real quick here. So as Brian said, prepayable at any time. It is really for your community the best option right now. USDA actually just lowered their rate again, surprisingly, kind of to me. They do it every quarter. They assess it, and I meant to look at this before the meeting today. I think it's at 2% now for 40 years, which is way below anything else you're going to get. Other than state revolving fund is also 2%, but again, that's a much onerous process to do. The reality of whether or not you do one bond issue at 7 million or let's say 2 bond issues 3 years apart at 3.5 million apiece, that comes down the line. It's an engineering discussion, bond attorney, financial advisor. They're going to direct you, with the help of Mike and Sue and the team, figure out when the money's going to be spent and what makes sense financially at that time. The reality is that when you do USDA, doing 2 series with USDA is extremely easy. And we would never, if we were to do that as financial advisors, say that you should issue $7 million if you're not going to spend the money in the next 2 years. That's the baseline that we typically tell people, is that you got to be able to tell us you're going to spend the money within 2 years. So if you're going to spend the money within 2 years, we'll talk. If it's just, we got to do these projects for 3.5, and then we've got another 3.5 on the shelf that's going to be 3 or 4 years from now, you don't want to pay the interest on that. Even though USDA is a draw program that is like a line of credit that you only pay on what you draw, they're not going to allow you to just say, yeah, we want to borrow an extra 3.5 now for projects 4 years from now. They're not going to allow you to do that. So the reality is that this is assuming, basically, we want it to be very conservative and say, what happens if you do it all right now, expend it all right now, and then you got the debt payments going out. So this is pretty conservative in that aspect. Another one to address on the USDA side, you've used Warren Kramer from Baird for financial advisor for the bond issues. And even if you use Warren Kramer for the bond issues on USDA, I would tell you the same exact thing right now, is that USDA right now, it's an extremely low interest rate. The reality is that based on just our metrics, you're most likely not going to qualify for grant. You have a pretty high median household income, and your rates are not really that high, relatively speaking. So most likely not going to get any grant. But USDA is, once you apply and start their process, once you get the letter of conditions, it's called, you're locked in until you close. That's your worst case scenario. So let's say you got the letter of conditions today and you close 3 years from now. Your worst case scenario is the current interest rate at 2%, even if it's 3 years from now closing. So our baseline for telling communities on what to do is, on USDA, you're better off, if you think you're gonna do a USDA program 3 years from now, you're better off starting the discussion now. You call Paul Bristow, which is your USDA rep. You have meetings with him, make sure that they're willing to loan the city money based on their metrics, based on your projects. Make sure everything's looking good, because you don't want, just as Brian said, in terms of the capital, you don't want to be blindsided by 3 years from now, you're ready to go, everybody's ready to do the USDA, and then Paul Bristow says, oh, well, we don't have money, or we're not going to fund that project because of this reason or something. So you're more, USDA is, I mean, we've had a USDA close like 10 years after the letter of conditions was issued. So you're much better off just if you know that those are projects you want to do through USDA, or even an inkling that you want to get an offer letter from them, you're better off doing it sooner than later and make sure you get in line. So it's not a commitment, it's just a letter of conditions. It does not need to take that commitment. It's just their offer to you, just like if you were to go to a bank to get a mortgage offer, so, yep.
Sorry to ask dumb questions.
No.
You've got amateurs here that this is what we do.
Yeah.
But we're talking about 2% rate increases for the foreseeable future because we're in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
But borrowing this $7 million over 40 years, the interest alone, or I'm sorry, the principal alone is $175,000 a year. At 3%, the interest is $210,000. So we're adding $400,000 a year.
So the principal and interest payments, you can see near the very bottom, that $7 million per year for 40 years is $272,750 per year. So $272,750 per year for 40 years is their principal and interest payment. That's included in the analysis.
Okay, what interest rate is that?
That is at 2.375.
Okay.
So it actually, if you were to get, I mean, you wouldn't, even if you started the process right now, you're not going to get in this quarter with the letter of conditions, but if you were, that would be a little bit lower because the current interest rate again is 2%. So.
Right, but at 3%, the interest, well, I guess it's spread out different, but we're adding quite a bit of expense to our system.
Yeah, it's built into that analysis though. So that's the reality, and that's, I mean, the reality is that you're doing a lot of capital improvements on the system to keep the system going. From a financial advisor, this is a question for Brian Newhoff, but from our perspective, those improvements don't go away. This is not something that you can just say, oh, we would rather not do these and we're just not going to do them for the next 20 years. I rarely see that's the case. It's not that the projects are just something that Mike wants to get done in his free time. It's that these need to get done. Whether or not they get done in 5 years or 10 years is maybe a discussion that we need to have. But it's the best way to fund them in the most cost-effective way. That's what we're trying to do. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So in terms of the sewer, yeah, it's really a positive discussion. You're looking at inflationary increases, less than $1 per month per year for the typical homeowner. Caveat to that, you got to think about this is going to affect different users differently. Basically, the discussion is the higher the user, the more it's going to affect you nominally. So Lighthouse, it's going to mean a 2% increase to Lighthouse, but that's nominally a higher dollar amount than your Joe Smith on Main Street. But that's the reality. Is your typical homeowner, it's about, what, 85 cents for the first year per month. So, any more questions on sewer? About the water? All right. So on the water side, this was actually when we first started doing the analysis, it was a little bit different again because of the Lighthouse situation, but when we came back to do the second analysis, we were anticipating a difference in philosophy between water and sewer, and the sewer actually is in a little bit better shape than water. So water it's not much different, honestly, but the water is a little bit higher initially to get the water fund revenues a little bit more for what we need to cover expense-wise. We'll go through the first couple of pages here pretty quickly again, but we'll get to the analysis in a second. So in terms of the cash and pooled investments, and page 2, cash and pooled investments again, not much to take away from right now, but page 2, the charges for services at the very top, water's been a little bit more stable. You can see that the revenues are going up a little bit every year. The operating budgets, so page 3, 4, and 5, your water budget's a little bit longer. Go to page 5, right in the middle, test your column, very bottom number, $896,958. So on the water side, Actually, really, your systems are pretty equal when you think about it. A lot of times that's not the case. You have, a lot of communities have one system that drives the boat one way or another based on the expenses of whether or not, most of the time it's sewer. Sewer is usually a little bit more expensive than water, but your water fund expenses are pretty similar, $896,000 a year that we need to bring in on the water side. If we go on to page 6, this is the water portion of that same debt issue, so the same 2016 bonds. The water portion of that debt issue is $65,000, give or take. And then page 7, actually, we've got 2 analyses for water. So let me back up real quick and talk about some legislation that's come down, which I'm sure you've heard of, is the lead and copper rule. So, has everyone heard of that? No, okay, so lead and copper rule, the lawsuit that was in court recently in the past 6 months or so was struck down. As far as I know, there is no appeal being processed right now. So the reality is that the lead and copper rule is the law. So Dan and his team are going to be working on that extensively, I'm sure, in the next few years to start compliance with the lead and copper rule. The full compliance kicks in next year in 2021 when the any sort of lead service line has to be starting to get replaced starting next year. I won't go into the engineering side. That's a discussion for Brian if you wanted to talk about what it is process-wise and everything, but the reality is that that is costing expenses on the system. So the main driver behind lead and copper rule that the state's pushing is that you cannot bill those costs directly back to the homeowner in terms of like a special assessment or connection charge-esque fee. Those expenses have to be borne of the fund itself. So with that in mind, when we were doing this analysis, there are expenses that are being incurred on the water fund for the next really 20 years, most likely. And there's a question about one of our ideas that we have been telling communities that it depends on your community, how you want to show it. Some communities are just saying, we've got a ready-to-serve charge and commodity, just build in the expenses to those 2 charges, and it is what it is. The state's forcing us to do it. Not that it's not good policy. I'm not saying that. It's just that this is, on the rate side, we've got to start building in these costs. One of the other ways to do it is to actually potentially show the customer how much that is affecting their bill. So the second analysis is to actually add a separate charge to say this is how much that rule is costing the fund and to keep that going. But the first analysis just builds that in, all those costs, all the costs, the Pryden-Newhoff capital improvements, the lead and copper rule, right into the analysis to say, we've got our current rates and charges right now. What does it look like to get the water fund funded as well as sewer? So let's talk about 2019-20. We'll skip ahead to the typical homeowner's bill on water. Water, as with most communities, is a little bit cheaper than sewer. So your typical homeowner's bill right now is $34.